Back in the 50s and 60s, pheasant hunting reigned supreme in many parts of the Midwest, but especially Iowa. Opening day had a special status as several generations would gather at the family farm or other coveted properties to match wits with the king of the upland birds. These experiences remain with us for a lifetime and become memories from the field. Tonight's guest is Steve Miller, and Steve is another one of these fellows that grew up in Iowa and hunted in the 50s and 60s. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Steve, welcome tonight.
Thank you.
Give us a little background. I know you grew up by Boone, or in Boone. What was home like?
Yes, indeed. I grew up in Boone, and we lived right on the edge of town in Boone, and right behind our house was a single-track railroad right-of-way that was seldom used when I started growing up. So one of the nice things was that I was able to walk right out my backyard practically and walk down those railroad tracks, and we were on the edge of the city limits. So we were able to essentially start hunting if we wanted to within about 200-300 yards of our house going down those tracks.
Well, I'm trying to think of what parents would think about kids going on the railroad tracks today and and hunting or playing or whatever. But it was a different time back then.
Indeed, it was.
Now, I think you told me that your dad really wasn't a hunter.
Yes,
but you got introduced to it from some people that you knew.
Yes, that's correct. My dad was, as I've said a little while earlier, was a golfer, and he didn't hunt, and no one in our family really hunted. But my friend, who was in the same class in school, lived a couple doors down. His family did hunt, and they hunted quite a bit, and so when I got to know my friend, his name was Larry. Larry and I began to want to hunt, and we were about 12 years old, and of course at that time didn't have a gun, but our mothers at Christmas time communicated and decided that maybe they would allow us to have a .22 rifle, which was our first guns at that time. So for Christmas, we each got a .22, and we started our hunting by going down these railroad tracks. And there were rabbits and squirrels, and as well as pheasants down there. But of course, with a .22, it was more of the rabbits and possibly a squirrel type of thing. But it wasn't too long thereafter that we graduated, or I did, to a shotgun, and I got my first .410, single-shot .410.
Do you remember what year that might have been?
Well, that would have been, I was about 12, I was either 12 or 13. I'm not sure which it would have been, so that would have been 1954.
Okay.
So I started hunting down there, and my friend and I both did, but I would walk down those tracks, and probably about a mile away, maybe from the house, was on one side of the tracks a grove of trees, and the other side was a big patch of cattails there. And of course, in the wintertime, there would have been water in there, and it would freeze over, and it was pretty good cover for pheasants. And I figured that out for too long. And the first bird I think I remember shooting was, I was walking through those cattails and picked up a set of tracks and followed them short distance, and it wasn't long before I flushed that rooster and had that single-shot .410 zeroed in on him, and I always remember using the 3-inch mags in that thing for a little extra power. But I hit that rooster, and he went sideways and down, and I thought, now am I going to find him? Well, there was snow on the ground, so it didn't take me too long to retrieve that bird, which I was pretty proud of. Took home and cleaned it up, and I believe my mom then sometime shortly thereafter fixed it for me for supper. So quite a kind of a memorable time, at least. Certainly that, I believe, was about my first pheasant.
So would you say that after that rooster, that were you pretty much hooked on pheasant hunting after that then?
Very definitely. Not long, right about the same time or shortly thereafter, we my friend's father, and he had an older brother, would invite me on weekends to go with them hunting, and we would typically go up north of Boone there to outside of a little town called Jewell, Iowa, and there was a farm up there where my friend's father knew the farmer, and they allowed us to hunt out there, of course, and hunting was a lot different in those days. You didn't really need dogs like you would nowadays. The corn at best was about 5.5 feet high, lots of weeds in there, and so the birds would hold real well in there, and you could walk through there. This farmer wasn't opposed to us walking through there if we were careful, even before he picked the corn. So we'd walk through there, and the birds would hold real well, and you'd almost have to kick them to get them to fly up. And I was tall enough in those days. I was about 6'2" when I was in the 8th grade, and even before that, I was pretty tall, so I could shoot over the top of the corn, and as I saw the birds, and so that worked out pretty well for me.
And that's a big difference that we've talked about.
Yes.
Between then and now, like how they grow corn today and the rows. How is it different then than it is now?
Well, of course, as I mentioned, the corn was not near as tall in those days as it is now, and the weeds. Of course, they didn't have the herbicides in those days, and so the corn was pretty heavily infested with weeds. And then you had the grass strips that grew through there because they didn't tile like they do nowadays. So the habitat was really wonderful for birds, and it made for a lot, in one sense, easier hunting for us. And there was always the bonus places there. There was a hay field, alfalfa field there that was right next to the corn that we hunted, and that was loaded with rabbits, and particularly jackrabbits. And I'd never seen a jackrabbit before. The first time one came up, I let it go. I didn't know what it was, and my friend and father said, "Well, that's a jackrabbit." He says, we'd take those. So anyway, we that day and several days thereafter, we'd once in a while we'd shoot a jackrabbit to go with the cottontails. And they would take this, particularly the jackrabbit meat, to a local store, grocery store, a little grocery store north of Boone, and the fella up there would grind this jackrabbit meat up half and half with hamburger, and he called it jackburger. And I don't know that anybody heard much about jackburger these days, probably not, but it was pretty tasty. Jackburger is what he called it, yeah. A place called Fergie's Grocery Store in Boone, Iowa there, and many years ago. But anyway, that was another thing that I remember fondly. But there were a lot of good days. We used to hunt the railroad tracks in a lot of those areas up there, even around Jewell, and that was allowable, I guess. No one ever said anything about it, and we would sometimes take two cars, and there were mile sections, so to speak, and we would one car would drop us off, and we'd walk the mile, and then the other fella would be down there at the other end and pick us up, and we'd get a lot of good shooting there. There was good cover along those railroad tracks there, right-of-ways, and both pheasants and rabbits, and I guess that was pretty much it along the right-of-ways, but very, very good hunting, a whole different deal than what you would experience today.
Would most of your hunting be just 2 or 3 in the group, or were you ever involved in any like big hunts, with big groups?
Well, usually it was just a smaller group of us. It was usually about 4 of us or so. Myself, my friend Larry, and his older brother Dave, and then Larry's dad, of course. And so usually it was about 4 of us. Occasionally we'd pick up another person or so, but not so much for me anyway in larger hunts. No.
Now did his dad, Larry's dad, did they ever have dogs that you hunted with?
No, they didn't have dogs. We never hunted with dogs. In fact, I never really had the luxury of hunting around a dog until my son, who started hunting with me when he was a young man, why he got married and had dogs, and so that was one of my first experiences. And now that I've had a taste of a good dog a time or two, why it kind of spoils you, but certainly more necessary nowadays, I think, than it would have been back in my early time.
Now, when you didn't have dogs, then would you just kind of get a skirmish line, so to speak, and push through the corn in sections, or down and back? How did you normally do it?
Well, what we did was we would, it depended on the field, if he had stripped the corn and picked some of it, so there were strips of standing corn, we would take those strips and we'd put one, if there were four of us, one on each edge and two down the middle, and we would push them toward the end of the field, and they would still hold pretty well because there was a lot of weeds even in those strips. And if they hadn't flushed by the time we got to the end, you can usually count on them a pretty good flush at the very end there. And so we were always ready for that when we were nearing the end of that particular strip. So that was one way we did it. Later on, or if there was only one or two of us, sometimes I hunted a lot by myself too, but one or two of us, we would hunt fence rows, or we would look for patches of weeds that went through the corn, narrow strips of weeds that was pretty heavy, and we would walk those, and that would work out pretty well for us. But fence rows were particularly productive for me. If they were pretty good, we would look for the pretty heavy covered fence rows, and that seemed to produce. And sometimes if there was a creek bed, we would walk creek beds too, because that would hold some birds. And so those kinds of things, you had to be kind of selective of the type of cover you walked, depending on how many people you had and that kind of thing. And that's the way we operated most of the time.
Now, in Boone back at that time, what would you say would the majority of people there lived in town? Were they pheasant hunters, would you say? Or
I don't know about the majority. We certainly had pheasant hunters. I had 3 or 4 friends, in addition to the one I mentioned, that were in school with me there, that went to high school with me. And one of the things I always remember about those days, and is certainly different nowadays, we had some old beater cars that we bought, when we were old enough to drive, and we always took our guns and hunting equipment to school with us, and left it right in the car, in the trunk of the car. Of course, we didn't take anything in the school building, obviously, but we had those guns in the cars, which I don't imagine nowadays would be welcomed. But we would get out of school and have about an hour left of time to hunt birds before the season closed for the day. So Boone not being very big, you could get right out of town there and start hunting ditches, particularly, for an hour or so. And we frequently would pick up a bird or two that way on a pretty regular basis. So something a little different in the way we operated in those days, and as compared to what would be allowed today as far as guns and carrying them and so forth.
What was opening day like back then?
Opening day, my first recollection, I was thinking of that the other night, and when I first remember hunting, and this was when I went with my friend and his dad and so forth, the season didn't start until noon. So it was half days, and I believe it started like at 12 noon and went to 4 or 4:30. And that didn't last too long until they did change it to a full day. And I suppose possibly that was the result of more birds available in those days eventually and so forth. But I do remember that, and I think that lasted for that would have been about the mid-50s, before 1960 certainly, I know.
Was there any kind of ritual that, your friend and you and his dad, I mean, obviously that was a big thing. Opening day's coming, you're planning for it.
Oh, yeah, the night before.
Did you have the big breakfast in the morning before you went out or anything like that?
Not so much that for us. We would Of course, we'd obviously get together the evening before and kind of compare notes what time we wanted to leave, and I'd be down at their house and get our lunches squared away, that kind of thing. But later on in my hunting, when I became an adult and lived around in Cedar Rapids area, there used to be a breakfast out here in one of the churches up by, I believe it was around Troy Mills or in that area, and fella and myself and several others that I knew and became hunting partners with, we would go up there and participate in that sportsman's breakfast before we went out. And that was arranged. It was a good arrangement there because everybody that went to that breakfast, you paid a small amount of money and a donation to the church, and that allowed you to hunt on a particular farm or two that had been designated for you alone, for your party for that day.
Really?
Yeah. So that was something I just, as we're talking here, been remembering.
So it was kind of a fundraiser
Oh,
for the
yeah,
church.
yeah,
then.
it was. It was a fundraiser for the church. It was up. One of them was up by Quasqueton, I remember.
Right.
I can't tell you the church anymore, of course, but I was invited the first time with this other group of hunters that I knew, and invited me to participate in that breakfast. But that was kind of a fun thing. Yeah.
Now, at some point, obviously, your son, you got him involved in the hunting.
Yes.
How did that all transpire? And do you remember taking him for the first time? And how old was he?
Well, the first time he went with me, he would have been, I remember I don't know if it was the very first, but it was pretty close. He wouldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years old. And he went with me for the day, and we were hunting down at the Amanas, and it began to snow. And we were out in the field walking, and he was tagging along with me pretty good. I was walking a fence rows down there. And pretty soon the snow picked up, and I could tell that he wasn't walking so well anymore. Well, I think I'd shot one rooster so far that day. I ended up with the rooster in my coat and him over my shoulder, and I carried him, my gun, and the bird in my coat back to the car. I don't know how far that was, but I always remember carrying him back that day. It was kind of a cold, blustery day, and he was just a little guy and been tagging along. But he of course, acquired an interest in hunting right away, and it wasn't too long thereafter, and I got him a BB gun to carry with me for the first few times we went out. And
Right.
a time or two, I'd shoot a bird, and the bird would be obviously dead there on the ground. And I'd say, "Hey, I think he moved. You better finish him off for me." So he'd shoot him with the BB gun, and think that he was a valid participant in the hunt.
Yes.
Which is what I wanted him to think, and that was good. But I've got a lot of pictures at home of the birds that we had and shot, and all the way from when he was a young guy at the BB gun level up to when he was an adult.
And we all kind of did that, and I think kind of felt as when I was growing up, and when you did, even though your dad wasn't a hunter, my granddad was a real big hunter. He had a farm down in Missouri, and that's kind of how I learned to hunt, tagging along him. But yeah, you kind of get to that point where you think, I need to pass the knowledge of the sport on to that next generation. Did you feel kind of like, kind of proud that you had somebody following you in this?
I did.
In this endeavor of pheasant hunting.
Yeah, it was. It was a lot of fun, and it didn't take much to get his interest up. I probably would have had trouble going out without him when he was a young kid there for a while after he first got a taste of it. And we'd embellish the trip with, a bunch of treats to eat and things like that. We'd sit down in the field there or back at the car, whatever it was, and, have some soda or sandwiches or whatever we were taking that day. But that was all part of it, and so I think it got him hooked pretty early.
Do you remember the day when he started shooting better than you did?
Well, we still debate that. I don't know if that's been
Well, I guess,
established
yeah, I was
yet,
in the
but,
field with you guys not that long ago, and you're right. I think you were debating that day.
Yeah,
Whether
we probably would still debate it today. I don't know anymore. I haven't shot as much as I used to in the last few years, but of course, as everybody knows, the hunting, the regular hunting that I've been talking about is not quite what it used to be, to say the least. And so my hunting days have dwindled a little bit, and but I would still be happy to go out and try it again one of these days, and hope to do it before I'm completely finished with it. But
what did you find interesting when you started hunting with the dog? I know that Lance had a dog.
Yeah.
How did that change things a little bit?
Well, I got so that I wasn't sure whether I enjoyed the hunting and the shooting of the bird anymore, or as much as watching the dogs work. And I still feel that way if I'm out and watching the dogs. I think that's just an awful lot of fun to see how they work and operate. And one of my son's first dog was he liked to hunt for himself a little bit sometimes, and he'd run the birds a little ahead of us, and which would frustrate my son. But that dog had a nose that the likes of which I don't know if I've ever seen. I don't recall that we ever lost a bird that we were sure we downed, no matter how they seemed to bury themselves in the brush and so forth. And that dog could find them, and so in that sense, it was just amazing.
And I think Lance, he was a lab guy, right? He have a lot of labs.
Yeah, he did. He had labs, and he had Goldens, and but more labs. I think the first one I was talking about was a black lab, and boy, that dog had a nose like, I think he'd probably say was probably the best he'd ever of any of the dogs he had. I don't know, but it was very good.
Now, other than pheasants, were you into duck hunting or anything else?
No, I never really was. I would do that, but I never really had the opportunity or took the wherewithal to get myself to where I would hunt ducks. I don't know. I had a fellas I knew used to have a place down on the Mississippi River, and they invited me a couple times, and but I don't know. I just it was one of those things. They'd sit in these blinds and so forth, and I kind of preferred walking the fields and being out that way rather than sitting there waiting in the cold in the early morning. And so I guess that's my rationale for not really getting into that part of it, although I wouldn't be opposed to doing it even today if the right situation arose.
Now going back in time again,
Sure.
I found myself interested in the fact that you think that when you kind of first started hunting in the early 50s, that there were half-day seasons.
Yes.
And then now I know South Dakota has had that for a while, where the first week of the season, it was like a half day from noon to
I think
4 or
that's
5.
Right, yeah.
Is that kind of what Iowa did at back then?
As I recall, I mean, I guess I was young enough, and I just kind of was going with the group, my friends and so forth, so I wasn't paying as strict of attention to that kind of thing as, so I'm going on some memory here, but as I do recall, for my stint, it was about just a 2 or 3, maybe 4 years. I don't know, about the mid 50s, I think, is when I first started hunting there. So it would have, but it wasn't too long thereafter that they went to a full day. I just don't remember the year.
Now, typically, when you would go up to this farm by Jewel, what were the bird numbers like?
Oh, I don't know what the count would be, but it was, you didn't have to hardly walk. You wouldn't walk 50 yards probably before you'd start flushing birds. I can't even imagine what the actual numbers would be.
Would you say there's hundreds of them flushing kind of?
Well, I don't know if I'd say hundreds, but it wasn't unusual. If you'd get to the end of a pretty good field there, you could put up, I don't know, anywhere from 10 to 20 birds maybe and going in all directions, and it would be such that you'd just be your head be swimming trying to figure out which bird to shoot at, before they got out of shooting range. But there must have been an awful lot of them in there, and they would hold pretty tight together until you actually flush. Of course, once they started flushing, they all took off, and
so it's pretty common to get a limit then. That was fairly easy to do.
Yes, I'm sure there were times when we didn't, but about every time that I remember, we didn't have any trouble getting a limit of birds. And I'm trying to remember whether there were 3 birds apiece in those days. I honestly don't remember what the limit was, but whatever it was, I just remember that we had my friend's father's car, and that trunk was just loaded with birds and jackrabbits and cottontails. I mean, the whole trunk. Well, of course, we had some guns in there too, but the thing was just loaded with game, and we would spend several hours, several of us, cleaning that stuff when we once got home at night, and so there was a lot.
And back then, was it pretty important that meat from that game that went on the table? I mean, people used that meat, and
absolutely,
because it was an important part of the feeding the family,
especially with my friends. My friend Larry and his family there, they not only hunted and used the meat, of course, for food there, but they raised rabbits in their backyard. They had hutches, and so they raised rabbits for food. They also had chickens that they would raise, So they were into. It wasn't just pure sport for them. It was food also, and the same way with the squirrels. I remember my friend's mother would fry up squirrels. We'd have fried squirrel. Well, I didn't know that I'd like that, but the way she fixed it was very good. And the rabbit. She'd fry up that rabbit, and it tasted an awful lot like fried chicken to me, I thought. And
has it been a while since you had squirrel?
Yes. I couldn't tell you how long ago it's been. I used to hunt squirrels prior to the pheasant season and in Boone, and we had some timbers there that we would go out and take our 22s and shoot squirrels. We'd try to shoot them in the head if we could, so we wouldn't damage the meat too much, but and we used to eat them then. But as I said, my family didn't come; they weren't hunters, and my mother was a very good woman, but she was not real proficient at cooking wild game.
Okay,
and so when she would cook up the squirrel, it wasn't quite the same, or the rabbit, as my friend's mother, and so I. Somehow or another, I kind of got the message that I would like to go down to their house and have dinner with them after the hunt, which they would invite me down and frequently, and I would eat rabbit and fried squirrel and so forth at their house.
Get his mom to cook your squirrel.
She knew how to do it, and she of course she was very good at preparing that food. It tasted very good. Yeah,
and that's kind of something that's changed too, because back then, like I said, a lot of the families, counted on that game, whether it was a deer or whether it was pheasant or whatever it was. But, which we kind of take for granted today. But now, as you kind of got in through your hunting career, did you ever take any trips out of state to hunt? Did you ever get into it to that extent?
No,
okay.
Not really. I hunted pretty much here in Iowa. That's I've done a lot of fishing in Minnesota and own a place up there for fishing purposes, but I've never hunted up there or anything like that. So my hunting has been Iowa.
Is there one particular hunt back then that really that you always remember that sticks out? Either something weird happened, or the day just went perfect, and you shot every bird that got up, or we all have that one hunt, that you go, gosh, man.
It kind of seems that way. I've had several of those, I guess, that were pretty memorable. One of them that I had that was kind of memorable in a not so good a way was We were out hunting west of Cedar Rapids, and this would have been, I suppose 30, 40 years ago, maybe. I don't know. But we encountered some other hunters that weren't supposed to be on the farm that we had permission to hunt, and they managed to fire their gun, and at long range, I was the recipient of some pellets.
Really?
and that wasn't what I would call a very good memory, but I didn't get hurt or anything. But it was one of those things that you don't forget when it happens to you.
We usually refer to that as getting peppered.
Yes, I did have that experience that time, and but good hunts. I don't know. I think one of the best hunts that I remember again was up by Jewel there on the farm that I had mentioned earlier, and we had a limit of everything, pheasants, rabbits, whatever jackrabbit limit was. I don't even know at this point in time, but we had it within an hour and a half, and we talked on the way home about how it was really a great day, but it was a short day because we just did that well so quickly, and that wasn't something that happened regularly. But on the other hand, we usually would I know get a limit or awful close to it every time we'd go up in that area. It was that good. I mean, there was. What a world of difference compared to what you would probably experience now, even up in that area. I haven't been up there for many years, of course.
One of the other things that's kind of changed would access to ground. Was it a lot easier back then to find somebody that was willing to let you hunt?
Yeah, for sure it was. Most of the time, if you just went up and knocked on the door, introduced yourself, said, we just noticed you had some habitat or some land out there that looked like it might be pretty good, and wondered if you'd allow us to hunt. And most of the time they would. Occasionally, of course, you'd get somebody that didn't either believe in hunting or whatever, and that wouldn't be the case. But I noticed a difference later on in the last, I don't know, I suppose. Looking back, I haven't been doing as much of that kind of hunting in the last 10 years anyway, or 15, but even 20 years ago, you began to notice a difference in that. Some of my last hunting experiences where I had pretty easy access was down in the Amana area, and we had 2 or 3 farms down there that I would go down. I would go down before pheasant season, and I'd drive around down there, and if I saw a place that looked good, and I would either go up and knock on the door and ask them about hunting way beforehand, or sometimes I'd see them working out in the field, and I'd stop them and ask them out there. But with that approach, most of the time, even 25, 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, I don't know, something like that, they would be amenable to let you hunt. And, I think they would kind of size you up a little bit too and make a determination as to whether, you were going to be all right out there or not. And I would sometimes offer to give them, a bird or two if they wanted them. And most of the time they didn't. One guy said, I'd rather eat chicken.
But they probably appreciated the offer.
Exactly. And then the other thing we would do, sometimes I'd take a big, either like a fruit basket down to them, or, some kind of a gift like that at the beginning of the season or before the season went very far, and give it to them. And then sometimes I'd just stop and talk with them a while, and they'd invite me in the house maybe for coffee or something, and you'd get that kind of a relationship going. And then for I don't know, probably 6 to 10 years or so, I had 2 or 3 farms down there where they knew me, when I showed up in the fall, and so it wasn't a problem to have access to the hunting on their farm.
Was the bird populations pretty good down in the Amana area back then?
Yeah, it was. It was pretty good until, again, I don't know the exact years here, but I would say that pretty much ended, or I didn't go down there too much anymore after about, actually, it probably was around the year 2000 or so. But prior to that, though, we still hunted down there. My son was either around here in college or even when he was first married. But and we would go, and then, as I mentioned earlier, then he began to have a dog or two, and we would finished our hunting career on private farms that way at that period of time. But
then you got to introduce a grandson into the mix, kind of.
Well, yeah. My grandson started hunting a little bit with us, but he was kind of late in the game in terms of the farms that I'm talking about.
Okay.
But what he did do is he liked to do a little shooting, and he and I would go out and shoot trap once in a while, that kind of thing. And as a matter of fact, I've got a 20 gauge gun, kind of a unique pump shotgun that I've promised him that he can have when I'm done with it, and he remembers that, of course. And and he used to hunt with it a little bit too. In fact, I believe, didn't he accompany us one time down at?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, down at the game farm.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. So,
it's always cool to see generations hunt. You know, I mean, I had my three sons all hunted, and
sure.
I don't have a grandson. I have a couple granddaughters, and I hope someday if I can hang in there long enough. They're pretty young, but hopefully if I can hang in there, I'd like to see one of them. Those young ladies towed a shotgun in the field. And I told my granddaughter when she was up here last summer, we had a litter of puppies, and I said, now I want to, be able to physically hunt and be in the field long enough to see you get a bird over one of these dogs that I've got out here, one of these puppies.
That would really be neat. I've got two young grandkids. That's the good news. The bad news is they live in Boston, and you don't do a lot of hunting in South Boston.
Probably not. Not.
But when they come, my grandson, he's 10, and then my little granddaughter's 7. But my grandson, when he comes to visit us several times a year, of course, I got a kind of an acreage that I live on in an area down there, and we've been getting him to shoot BB guns down there at targets, and he enjoys that a lot.
Yeah, he likes the preserve would be a perfect place to get him out someday.
Yes, it would. It would.
Gets to be a little older.
I hope that will occur, and I think he'd be real interested in that because we've got him fishing, and he really likes the fishing real well, and he likes that kind of thing. But Boston's a different environment than Boone, Iowa was.
I'm sure.
So
it's amazing though. We get a lot of hunters that come here to Iowa that come from Pittsburgh and places. I see them at the preserve all the time. It's kind of cool. So
yes, sir.
So you're going to have to get him out of that city once in a while and get him in there.
We will do that.
Chasing roosters.
Yeah, we'll have to get him up here at the right time. They always come up for Thanksgiving, so that
perfect.
might be an opportunity.
There you go.
And Christmas.
Yeah.
So there's some when another year or two maybe when he's getting to the point where he's up to the 12, 13-year-old range,
Now, I wanted to ask you about that first shotgun, that 410.
Yes.
Tell me a little more about that 410.
Well,
what kind was it?
I believe it was a Harrington Richardson, from what I remember.
You remember where did it come from? How did you get it?
I just bought that at a Western Auto store in Boone, Iowa.
Really?
Yeah, they sold guns down there. The hardware stores in Boone in those days had a whole section of guns. They all did, and we had Western Auto. We had a place called Hamilton, which was Hamilton Hardware, which was a locally owned place. Big rack of guns there and everything. And as kids, we'd go in there and eyeball those guns and get kind of turned on by that, And but no, that's I just picked one up. I guess I would have been 13 or 14. I hunted the 22 initially for about a year, and then it became real evident to me if I wanted to shoot pheasants, I couldn't use a 22,
Right.
a single shot 22, which is what I had at the time. So I got talked my parents into allowing me to get a 410, and because of course that was the smaller gauge for a young guy, and but I always used the 3-inch mags. It would take I believe it was a 2.5 and a 3-inch shell in those things, and it was just single shot. Cock the hammer on it and that kind of thing. But
was that the break open?
Yeah,
one
yeah,
and single shot.
Yeah.
Did you get pretty good and quick at reloading that baby?
I think I did, and I'd say this too. My start with a 22, I think, always helped me in my shooting with a shotgun, because with a 22, obviously, you had to be right on the target with that darn gun if you were going to hit anything. Well, when I got that 410 with the spread of the shot, I thought, well, I can't miss anything with this darn thing. Well, I found out, yeah, you could, but I also kind of, I don't know whether I just kind of grooved a way of shooting or what, but I seem to be able to do pretty well with that gun, and I always kind of attributed that to maybe me learning to shoot with a 22 when I first started out, that somehow I disciplined myself to just kind of be able to feel that I had that bead on the target, and before I pulled that trigger.
Now, how many seasons do you think you carried the 410 before you upgraded to the 20?
Not more than one or two.
Okay.
I went to a 20 gauge after that, I remember. Then from a 20 gauge, of course, we graduated up to the 12 gauge, and I had a Browning automatic, one of those old standard Browning automatics, and I'm a left-handed shooter. So the guns are designed to kick the shell out there for right-handed shooters, and I didn't know, I didn't think anything about it. And I hunted with that darn thing for a number of years, and I never had any trouble with it. And people would say, well, doesn't that shell bother you? When I said, I didn't even see it. So I don't know, but anyway.
Was that the old A5 humpback? Was that what it was?
Yes, yeah.
That's what my granddad had.
Yep.
And it spent most of its life on a combine, of course.
Oh yeah, sure.
It wasn't,
I understand.
it wasn't real pretty to look at, but boy, I thought it was an automatic. I remember being just in awe of that gun.
Yeah, Auto 5, wasn't it? That's what they were. And I had that for I don't know. I hunted with probably 5-6 years or more, and then I went to a Ithaca pump, a featherweight Ithaca pump 12, which I still have, and I used that for a number of years. Then, of course, I've picked up several other guns since then. But
so that OA5, do you still have that?
No, I don't. I must have traded. I think I traded that for that Ithaca, and that I remember the year was 1964 when I bought that Ithaca pump, and it was some local shop down here in Cedar Rapids. I just graduated from college, and anyway, my friend that I'd talked about, Larry, he'd gotten back from the service, and he had this Ithaca pump, and I shot it a couple times. I thought, boy, that's a slick gun, nice lightweight, and I just liked it. And so I traded my old Browning in for the Ithaca pump, which still got today. And my son Lance has got his eye on that gun someday.
Yeah.
He hunts with it occasionally.
Yeah, that was
now.
My first shotgun was a 20 gauge Ithaca.
Yeah.
They were. I think they were kind of made by Montgomery Ward, or mine did anyway.
Was it? Yeah, I don't know.
Sold through Montgomery Ward, but mine had the choke adjuster on the barrel.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. Mine was just a straight. Well, it came with a full choke barrel, which is pretty tight nowadays. And I ordered then another barrel, which I have today, that with a what is it? I don't know if it's improved or modified barrel that I've got. So I got two barrels for it now.
So if you went hunting today or tomorrow, what gun would you take out of the gun safe typically?
Well, I've got a Benelli now, a semi-auto Benelli, and it's for left-handers.
Ultralight version, one of the real lightweight.
It's it's a black Max or something like that.
How old are you now, Steve?
How old?
How old are you?
I'll be 83 on Monday.
83 on Monday.
Yep.
Well, happy birthday.
Well, yes, and thank you.
83.
Yep, I'm still plugging away. I don't know.
Awesome. Well, I know you cut wood and do all kinds of stuff. So
yeah, still doing it.
great.
Yep.
You're kind of my, I'm using you as my model of where I need to.
Well,
I just turned 70, so I'm just
did
a,
you? Oh,
I'm
you're
just
just
a kid.
pup. Yeah.
I'm just a kid.
Oh,
I guess.
yeah. You.
So
got
I can't complain, right?
You got a lot of longevity left there. You did just.
So you mentioned you got a Benelli.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and there was a reason. Did you always want a Benelli, the Italian-made gun? Or,
I don't know.
You said your buddy had one, right?
Well,
or not?
No, that was the Ithaca I was
Okay.
talking about.
Okay.
The Benelli, I just, I don't know where I came across that. I guess I was nosing around in, I was trying to think where I bought that. And I'm not sure because I went to several places, but I just was looking around and I'd always hunted with the pump, that Ithaca pump. And for some reason, I just thought, I'd kind of like other than the old Browning I had way back when, but I just kind of wanted to try the semi-auto. So I knew the Benelli was thought to be a pretty good gun and so forth, and wasn't real cheap, as I remember. But anyway, I just decided that they had a left-hander model there for a left-handed shooter, and so I just liked the feel of it, and I went with it, and seemed to shoot pretty well with it, at least as well as I did with the other one. So I was satisfied, and I hunted with that probably until I hadn't hunted, until my hunting days kind of weaned a little bit, but probably 10, 12 years anyway.
Now, is that a 12 gauge?
Yeah, it's 12 gauge.
12 gauge.
Yeah, and it's always worked real well for me. Never had a jam with it or anything like that.
Yeah, I've got one I've hunted with for years, and I like it because it weighs 5 pounds.
Yeah, it's nice to carry.
If you hunt all day or most of a day, boy, you're
Well,
carrying that thing.
The older you get, the more you're going to
Can you
appreciate the lightweight.
Can you imagine today carrying that A5?
No,
what that would be like?
That's one of the things. That thing was heavy.
It was.
I never used to think much of it in those days, but of course, in those days, I was a little bit different physical shape than I am
True.
in
Very
the
true.
latter part of my life, and so I suppose that has something to do with it.
Now, you were telling me, we were talking about famous dog stories.
Yes.
There's, of course, every time you go out, you're making a memory of some type. Some of them obviously are more vivid than others, but
some better than others.
Well, that's true. Now this story about tell me about the lab, and that lab was Shady, right?
Yeah, Shady was the lab's name. My son had this dog. I think it was his first dog that I recall, anyway. But as I'd mentioned earlier, this dog had a real nose on her, anyway. And but we were hunting down in the Amana area, and bird flew up, and we shot it, and we could tell we hit it. It went sideways, and then it kept flying, of course, like they do sometimes, and dropped down about, I'd say, around 200 yards into a mowed hayfield down there, and there were several stacks of big round stacks of bundles of hay down there that they'd left. And
you're talking about the big bales.
The big those huge bales, I believe, is what it was. But anyway, it was big hunks of hay, whatever it was. And we happened to look down there because we were wondering if that when the bird finally went down, if he just stayed down or what. And next thing we know, the dog's down there, and we looked a little more, and pretty soon this rooster comes running around one of these haystacks at a pretty good clip, and shortly thereafter, the dog was right behind him, and this did about 4 laps around this big pile of hay. And
was the dog gaining ground at all?
Well, not enough to get him anyway. I don't remember what the yardage would have been at that stage, but at any rate, after about 4 laps, we noticed that the dog stopped and changed and went the opposite direction, only to meet the rooster who didn't change and grabbed him right and nailed him right there on the spot. And it was the funniest thing watching that dog do those laps around there and then figuring out, hey, I'm going to go the other way. I'll get him when he comes back around that way. And lo and behold, he did.
Now, did that dog retrieve that bird back to you
Oh,
guys?
yeah, we got the bird
Really?
then. Yeah,
Really?
yeah, he got him back.
So that's the one you wish you had on video, right?
Oh, that would have been something. I tell you, it was. We still talk about that thing and that dog periodically. So it was a fun thing.
Well, any other incidents like that you remember?
Well, the one that we also talked about briefly here not long ago.
Oh,
was the time I was hunting down at the preserve and. Bird came up and I think it was flying away and then turned around and kind of flying back toward me. And I shot it and apparently hit it, obviously. And the bird just came down. And the next thing I know, the bird hit me. And I'd never had an experience like that in my life where this bird was up quite high and I shot it coming toward me. And the next thing I know, the darn bird runs right hit me right in the chest as he fell. And,
well, I have to confess that I was a witness.
Yeah, you were, and
that was a heck of a shot. Though.
Well, I don't know.
But you know, and it was a high flying bird, if I recall.
Yeah,
and then
I think so.
You folded it dead in the air.
Yeah.
And that sucker fell a long way, so it hit you pretty hard.
Oh yeah, it was a pretty good thump, and I still I remember the sound and even kind of the thud when he hit me, but obviously it wasn't it didn't hurt me or anything. But if I'd have just known, I'd have had that game pouch open, see, and I could have dropped him right into the pouch, and that would have been a classic.
And you would be a legend.
Yes,
and you would be you're already a legend, but you'd be more of a legend.
Well,
after as old guys sit around and tell that story, years from now,
Yeah, I don't think too many could tell one that was actually true like that one, but.
That was a heck of a deal. You know, things like that happen over the years. You know that you go, gosh, who would have thought? Those are the days, though, that you're glad that somebody else was in your hunting party.
Yeah.
You know, if you'd have been out there by yourself, nobody, you wouldn't have had anybody to share that with, right?
No, they probably wouldn't even have believed me at that stage. But there were obviously you guys were a couple witnesses, so
the kamikaze rooster.
It was something else, that's for sure. But I guess I earned that one.
So obviously, what do you think pheasant hunting? I mean, what over the time that you hunted from being a youngster and on, what was pheasant hunting what did it mean to you? I mean, what was it just getting outdoors, or was the?
Well, that was part of it, of course. I'd always enjoyed being outside, and even as a little kid, based upon where I lived there, I was fortunate enough to be out where, I could go down those railroad tracks I mentioned, and we would just hike down there as young kids, little kids, and spend the day down there playing. And, we'd be down there. We'd build a little campfire, roast a hot dog or something once in a while as young kids. And so that was part of it. But I enjoyed the shooting, too. And, I even enjoyed eating the game if it was prepared decent. And as I mentioned earlier, fortunately, I was invited to my friend's house for fried rabbit and squirrel and pheasant and so forth at a number of occasions. So that was good. And you looked forward to the weekends in the wintertime sometimes, even when rough weather. And we've hunted in some awful cold, rough weather. We've been out there when it was literally below zero walking, and which I certainly wouldn't even consider doing anymore, of course, even if it was as good a hunting as it was then. But no, that was all part of it. I don't know.
It kind of was part of growing up in Iowa, wasn't it? Really?
It was. I think so. Growing up in Iowa and up there where I grew up in Boone, Iowa, it's certainly different than what kids grow up in nowadays, probably even in Boone, Iowa.
Oh, I'm
and
sure.
that town has changed quite a bit, too, since I lived there many years ago. But, it was a good time. We enjoyed the outdoors, and I think you gain an appreciation for nature and just being outside like that and in a fresh environment and it was I think a lot more wholesome than what some kids are into nowadays, sitting there looking at their phones or their computers and things like that. And because we were outside active all day long, and I think it was a lot more healthful for us, too.
Yeah, I do, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I tell you what, I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us some stories and to share some of your memories of growing up hunting and kind of what that sport has meant with you over the years. Obviously, I'm assuming that you're not quite done yet. If you get the right opportunity, you're going to get out there again.
I will. I think I talking with my son about it, who fortunately lives not too far from us, and he too would be interested. But like me, he sees the difference in hunting, even when he started as a little kid with me. So. But the right time and place and so forth. We hope to get in a few more hunts before our season is ended.
Yes.
So that's something to look forward to, and hopefully in not too far distant future.
This episode brought to you by way of our sponsors, Kinetic Performance Dog Food. Kinetic's line of premium dry food and supplements provides clean, sustainable energy for everyday active, sporting, and working dogs. Visit kineticdogfood.com for details. And Highland Hideaway Hunting Preserve in Riverside, Iowa, with over 1,500 acres of meticulously managed and maintained preserve. Book a hunt today at highlandhunting.com.